Welcome everyone to our next webinar, The Hidden Costs of Not Governing Microsoft 365. My name is Matthias Einig. I'm the CEO of Rancor, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what governance or not governing your Microsoft 365 tenant means actually, and how you can stay in control of the costs when running your Microsoft 365 tenant. This webinar is part of our Govember campaign, and we are going to add a lot of cost-related tips and tricks in the couple of weeks until the end of November. So please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever you're at, and you will get the latest and greatest from us. All right, so governance. Well, it's a very, very broad term, and basically just means that it's the act or the process of governing or overseeing the control and direction of something, in our case of Microsoft 365. But I think with everyone who we talk to about governance, we get at least 2 or 3 different opinions what it actually means. So I want to introduce a little bit from our perspective what we believe Microsoft 365 governance actually means and what the main challenges are. Basically, in the context of Microsoft 365, you are facing the challenge that this service is constantly growing, and the adoption of that service in your organization is also constantly growing, which poses a lot of challenges for the IT department to keep everything in check, basically. Even worse, Microsoft, the way Microsoft is organizing the data, everything is in silos. So if you go into the administration centers of Microsoft 365, you look for SharePoint, or you look in OneDrive, or you look in Teams and Power Automate and Exchange and so on. So there's rarely an interconnected way to observe the data, how your Microsoft 365 tenant is used within the organization. The licensing itself is quite intransparent, at least in my opinion. So Microsoft, you all know the various Microsoft EX or FX license types, and it's constantly changing. Things are getting added, things are getting removed. You can buy add-on licenses. You have pay-as-you-go licenses, for example, in Power Platform. So it's quite confusing, and I think not even Microsoft understands what the licensing actually is and how to calculate how much you're going to pay for what you're using. And in general, of course, managing a Microsoft 365 tenant is quite tedious. It takes a lot of time. First of all, finding the information, and then also doing the work. You have to do that step by step. Of course, you can build your own scripts in PowerShell, or export data through the APIs, maybe build a Power Platform, a Power App to help you with those tasks. But again, building that stuff is also taking time. And if Microsoft is changing something, which constantly happens, APIs are changing, capabilities are changing, then you have to adjust constantly. So not really fun, and distracts you from the actual work that you probably want to do. And often you just don't know where and how to act in order to get things under control. You just realize after the fact that something got out of control, and now you have to rein it in. So when I'm going deeper into the cost challenges, I'm going to show you in our product how you can address them there. I give you a brief overview what the product actually is doing and how it works, so that I don't have to explain that when we look into the individual use cases. So for that, I'm just reloading here. I'm going into the product. So you're seeing now Rancor Governance, a dashboard. This is the tenant overview dashboard, where you can see, for example, compliance to various challenges or use cases that you have. So costs in our case, for example, and you can go further down and see various charts where you can save money, where policies are violated, and so on. So I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later, just to make you understand a little bit how Rancor Governance is set up. at the core, there is the inventory. I mentioned before that Microsoft silos the data, so you only look at the services. And we try with Rancor Governance to get all that information together in one place. So you see here are all the various services, Microsoft 365, Teams, Power Automate, SharePoint, Yammer, OneDrive, Exchange, and also Azure Active Directory. And each of these services has various entities or objects. So we have users, we have groups, licenses, but we also have, for example, user activity reports, we have teams and channels and apps in the teams and so on. So, and all of that is interconnected. And the beauty of Rancor Governance is that you can basically use this connection to identify certain configurations in your Microsoft 365 tenant, report on it, and also monitor it over time. So in order to monitor things, you can create policies. We call them checks. Policy is a little bit of a harder term, and for us it's just a check. So you're checking something, does not necessarily have to be something bad, so it can be only informational, but the checks help you to track specific topics of concern, for example, unused sites in SharePoint. So if you go into such a check, then you see how the violations of that check have changed over time. You see the actual violations, and the check is very easily adjustable, configurable. So you see, for example, it reports a violation for every SharePoint site collection that hasn't been used for more than 90 days. That's it. And you can add relations to it, for example, saying, and has any owner that is, for example, disabled. It's a disabled user account, so the account is disabled. So then you have the ability to, connect the data, the user data with the SharePoint data, and you can go further and add additional objects. So that's one part how you can work with it. And the other part is you can build also reports in a similar way, and for example, find report, for example, users by region. So you can visualize all of that in a similar builder where you just look in this case at the user and decide on the visualization how you want to present the data, which you then can put on a dashboard again. So knowing all of the information, getting the information in the inventory and building your policies, your checks, is only one step. The final step is then, okay, you want to resolve the violations, and obviously you don't want to do that always manually. So for that, we have our own automation engine that allows you to build your automations that whenever a check that you have defined is violated, something is happening. So we're going to look into that at a later step. All right, going back to the slides, costs. What are the main cost drivers for Microsoft 365? Obviously, one of them is licensing. Every user needs to be licensed in some way. People can be licensed in various products. There might be also overlapping licenses, so that include multiple apps. So Microsoft is splitting licenses in the license itself, which includes then apps, but the apps can be included in various different licenses. The second cost driver is storage. So SharePoint and OneDrive in particular, both require storage for all the data to be stored. And of course, the other services use SharePoint in the background. So if you upload a file in a Teams chat, it will be stored in a Teams channel. It will be stored in SharePoint. When you upload a file in a Teams chat, it will be stored in your OneDrive. When you record a Teams meeting, it will be stored in your OneDrive, and so on. And this all adds to the storage on top of the documents that you're working on. And well, there are some there's some included storage in your licenses, but as soon as you exceed that included storage, you're going to pay for it. Well, then last, it's the general consumption of the service. The more customers, the more end users are using Microsoft 365, building stuff, maybe with Power Platform, uploading stuff and so on, the more they are consuming and eventually causing costs, which might not always be necessary. So we're going to look into that now step by step. Let's start with the licensing challenges. A common theme, of course, in every organization is that people leave the company. And in many organizations, this is not necessarily meaning that the account is getting immediately deleted. So the person who was in the organization might get the account only deactivated, and then the license is not removed. So depending on the policy, how you have set that up in your organization, sometimes for some customers, for example, the disabled user accounts remain in the system for half a year. And if the license hasn't been removed, you're basically paying for a user that is not using the services. Similar with inactive users. People might be inactive for various reasons. Maybe they are on an extended sick leave, maybe they are on parental leave, or are on a longer vacation. You never know. And in that time, you're basically paying licenses to Microsoft without actually using them. So identifying these inactive users and maybe automatically removing their licenses and restoring them at a later step could save you a lot of money. And the larger your organization is, then the more frequent is it, and you will always have some kind of base amount of users who either fall in the first or in the second category. So if you keep that below that threshold, you could eventually buy less licenses from Microsoft and save money. Sometimes it happens also that external users are getting licenses. Maybe they don't even need to be licensed, but somebody assigns them a license. Or it can also be that they are collaborating, for example, in a specific service that is not available for external users, and you on purpose assign them a license to use that service in Microsoft 365 to collaborate with them, but you might not remove that license again when that external user is no longer working with you. The external users still remain in your system. They still have the ability to log in maybe, but they become inactive. So it's quite similar with inactive internal users, but in general, external users might not even require licenses in the first place. Next, we have users that are over-licensed. What do I mean with over-licensed? Basically, they have licenses assigned which include apps that they are not using. For example, they're using a Microsoft E5 license, but don't use PowerApps and PowerAutomate at all. And maybe they could be downgraded to a lower tier. Or they have, for whatever reason, multiple overlapping licenses assigned, an E5 and an E3 license. And you want to identify these things and remove the unnecessary additional license here. Yeah, and then last, generally, you might have too many licenses in the first place. So usually customers buy licenses in bulk, the larger they get from Microsoft. So you always will have some unused licenses. But well, if you don't take care of that and don't monitor the unused licenses, you might forget to reduce the amount on the next renewal that you're doing with Microsoft when negotiating, for example, the enterprise agreement. So I will show you how this can be solved in Rancor governance. So I have a couple of checks and reports here in Rancor governance prepared already, which I quickly load. So I'll address the examples that I showed you. And of course, these can also be modified whenever. So first one is licenses assigned to disabled user accounts. You see already here, so this is our demo tenant with demo data. You see there's an Office 365 E5 license and a Microsoft 365 E5 license, and you see multiple users are having disabled user accounts but still have licenses assigned. So if I look at the configuration of that check, you see the report should include every license that has any user where the account enabled is set to false. So if I go back, if I go back to the report, you can also see if I dive into that specific user, for example here Adele, that Adele is having the account disabled. You see that here already. And if I look at the related objects, you see all the licenses that are currently assigned to her. So these could be easily removed either now manually. So I could now click remove license from user, choose the license that I want to remove, and then it would be removed in your system. Or, which I will show you in a later step, it could be also done automatically. Second example, licenses assigned to inactive users. So what do we call inactive? Well, that's up to you eventually. In our case, we look at users that haven't signed in for more than 90 days. And maybe you don't want to immediately remove the licenses. Maybe if somebody hasn't logged in for 30 days, you want to notify the manager and ask the manager, hey, is this person indeed currently inactive? Can we remove the license, for example, and helps you to save on these costs again. This is an over-licensing use case, for example. So user licensed with Microsoft Power Automate, but without use flows. So not even that they are owning Microsoft flows in Power Automate, they're actually not even using flows. So if I look into the configuration, then you can say, give me all users that have more than one license that includes either Flow or E5. That's just an example because Flow Power Automate is included in E5 and has no used flows. As easy as that. And then you define the visualization of that report, and then you immediately see who these users are and can act on that, of course. So next, licenses assigned to external users. So we have also an example for that. So we have external users here. You see they have the user type guests, but they have an E3 license assigned. Similar configuration, as easy as that. You just click that together. You don't have to dive into the administration centers. You don't have to use the APIs to export the data and relate the data. This is all done already automatically in the product. And last, licenses with unused seats. So each license comes with the information how many seats are included and how many seats are used and unused. So Microsoft is already providing that information, which you also see in the administration center. But in here, you can, for example, set a threshold whenever this reaches less than 90% are used, for example, then notify the procurement department to reduce the amount of licenses that you are purchasing from Microsoft in the next renewal term. So as you can see, there's a lot of flexibility here, how you can add checks, and these are just all examples which already come as templates in the template library. So you can just select one of these, but then you can adjust it to your own requirements. All right, let's look at the storage challenges. So I mentioned before already SharePoint and OneDrive, well, obviously require storage. And the problem is that by default, when a SharePoint site hits the storage limit, it's increasing automatically. So Microsoft is not just saying, hey, you ran out of storage, do something. By default, it's actually just adding more storage, which you're having to pay. Similar for OneDrive, if a user is uploading an excessive amount of data to a OneDrive, then the user will not be prevented by default. When the capacity threshold is reached, then it's just going to be increased and causing you costs at the end. And then last, also, large SharePoint drives and SharePoint sites and OneDrives could be probably cleaned up or archived to actually save your data, for example, when they are unused. So if a SharePoint site hasn't been accessed or hasn't been modified for a period of time, maybe it's time to archive it. It's maybe an orphaned team site or an orphaned storage location that has no reason anymore, and maybe you have already an archiving solution in your organization where you store that out of compliance reasons. You maybe don't want to delete all that data, but removing it from the SharePoint service allows you to save the money on storage again. So let's have a look how this does look like in the product. So we have here the storage examples. Loading. So the first one is SharePoint site collections near storage limit. So Rancor governance retrieves how much storage each SharePoint site is using, and you can define the storage limit that you want to, or the storage limit is also retrieved, and you can say that you, for example, want to be including that SharePoint site in the report when you reach 90% of the storage limit. You can also use the actual amount of megabytes or gigabytes as a filter criteria if you want to have it that way. This is relative to the storage limit that has been defined. Similar, this works for OneDrive. So it's basically the identical check, only that you are, or identical report, only that you're reporting on a different object in your Microsoft 365 tenant. This one, a large OneDrive size, is in general giving you an overview. OneDrives that are exceeding 100 gigabyte of data. In our demo data, we don't have that right now, but yeah, you get the picture how this works. You could also choose a lower threshold, 1 gigabyte, for example, and then report on these users and, for example, automatically inform those users, okay, you're using way too much data in your OneDrive, please clean it up. You can even, with Rancor governance, look into the file types. So it's also possible to scan all the files in OneDrive and SharePoint and report on that and say, for example, certain file types are undesired, or which file types are using the most storage. Maybe somebody's uploading a lot of very large movie files, for example, on his OneDrive. Then you might want to contact the person and inform them that this is maybe not the best place to store this stuff. Next, we have also the example, for example, unused SharePoint site collections with more than 1 gigabyte. So this is combining two criteria here. We have, on the one hand, last use is more than 90 days ago, and the storage use is greater than 1 gigabyte. So you can combine the filter conditions and build your reports or checks on this combination. All right, going back, consumption. A few examples. Well, a lot of organizations have rolled out the Power Platform and encourage the organization to make stuff. They call themselves makers. Building basically Power Automate flows and building Power Apps to solve business problems, build simple functionality without having to go through the IT department every time. And you can also build very complex apps, of course, with Power Apps, and which give you maybe a much quicker time to market. But these Power Apps use often connectors to retrieve data from other services. And if Power App or a flow is using the premium connectors, so a special type of connectors, these premium connectors need to be licensed. That means every user of the Power App requires a license to be use Power Apps with premium connectors. So if somebody builds a Power App or a Power Automate flow with a premium connector, and then you start rolling that out and realize, okay, other people don't have the appropriate license, you might need to upgrade their license in order to enable them to actually use the Power App or flow that has been built. So with Rancor Governance, you are able to identify these Power Apps and flows, and also identify who is using and owning these flows and Power Apps, and use that to, on the one hand, maybe educate the builders or the makers, and on the other hand, maybe also find different ways to solve that. Sometimes you don't even need the premium connector and might be able to find another way around to solve the business problem, and allowing you to downgrade the licensing of all the users of these apps. Similar it is with unused flows in Power Apps. People are building stuff and then maybe they abandon it. Maybe the department departmental structure is changing. Suddenly that business process is no longer used or required, or people leave the company. Nobody knows that they have built something, a flow or a Power App. So that adds clutter, adds also cost if these Power Apps or flows are licensed. And in general, of course, collaborating in Microsoft 365 creates clutter. People are creating teams, are creating sites, are creating apps, and sometimes, well, the life cycle of that specific team, app, SharePoint site, and so on has ended, and nobody's cleaning it up. So this clutter is, of course, causing, on the one hand, storage costs, but on the other hand, it's causing also costs and efficiency for your organization. Not being able to find the right information or the right place where the information is stored is killing the efficiency of your team, of your organization, and you want to clean that up to make it easier for people to find the right places and not have a lot of orphan sites and orphan teams lying around that nobody knows who owns them and who uses them. So looking into those use cases, I'll show you, sorry. Let's load some example checks here. So the first one is flows requiring premium licenses. So this is rather easy, and basically you see here, for example, a flow to analyze positive or negative sentiment in text, and it uses the Microsoft Dataverse. Dataverse requires the premium connector. You see it's in the API tier premium here. So you see we have identified 4 flows that require premium licenses, and you can take a look in the check again. So report every flow that has any flow connection, which is in the API tier premium, or in the connection tier premium, or has any flow triggers that are premium, or has any flow actions that are premium. So as easy as that, you can build your query and get the data back in your check. In this case, it's not a report or a check. The result is the same. Report on that, and for example, delete that flow or inform the flow owner that this flow should not work. These haven't even run yet, so you don't have any run history here. So it might be that they are totally unnecessary because nobody's using them. So you could even also add that, for example, in the query. I think I have an example in a moment. Yeah, stopped flows is similar. So basically clutter. You have flows that are in a state stopped, so they are not running. You could also add, for example, that are not stopped but don't have a run history for the last 30 days. So they could also be considered unused flows, and you can alert on those then. Other example, teams. Well, you all probably use teams, and you're all aware that everyone has too many teams that they are member of, and are probably overwhelmed with all the messages everywhere that are popping up. So identifying inactive teams that can be removed, that can be archived, for example, is helping the entire organization, obviously. So here we have a check that identifies inactive teams. And that's, yeah, in this case, inactive is defined either that the last message posted is more than 6 months ago, and site collection, usually it's only one site collection unless there are private channels, the site collection connected to that team has also last use set more than 6 months ago. So by that you can identify, okay, nobody's using that team, and inform, for example, the team owner or the manager of the team owner, that you're going to archive that team, for example, in the next 30 days. Also, SharePoint sites without owners, or similar teams without owners, or PowerApps without owners. This is all clutter. How can that happen? Well, obviously, when somebody leaves the company, then the person was originally the owner, person leaves the company, account gets deleted, nobody thinks about what is connected to that user, and then you have your orphan SharePoint site collections, teams, OneDrives, and so on. So identifying those and archiving those can save you costs again. All of these things can be added to a dashboard. So here is an example for a declutter dashboard. So you see the checks that I showed you are part of the compliance status. So you can give a severity to each of these checks and say, okay, this is really critical for us, or this is less critical. And then every item that every object that you have, so for example, every team or every flow and so on, is checked. And if it meets the check's requirements, then it's compliant, and if it violates the requirements, then it is a violation and shows up here. So that makes up your compliance status in that specific use case or challenge. And here you see the individual checks, and then you can also, for example, put on the dashboard the individual check and see how it has changed over the course of time, what has changed, how compliant that is. So here's, for example, one violation of 46 items. So that's helping you a lot. And these dashboards, again, they can be easily modified. So you can add more tiles, you can rearrange the tiles, you can add more reports on them. You can share these dashboards also with people who don't have access to Rancor governance, for example, on a schedule via PDF. And that helps already a lot to give other team members, also maybe the compliance department, maybe the procurement department, a better insight. So, for example, the costs dashboard, which shows you potential cost savings for disabled user accounts per month, potential cost savings for unused units. You can sum that up and send that report, for example, to the procurement department, where you can identify future savings. All right. Going back to the slides. So what is at the end the core governance challenge? Well, this problem is never solved. The organization is constantly changing. You're constantly adding users, removing users, adding content, changing responsibility. So this is a fight against windmills. You cannot do that manually. That just does not scale. And the larger your organization is getting, you will realize that, well, either you have the one option to lock everything down, which will harm adoption of the services and probably upset your end users. You can, on the other hand, let it just go, and you deal with the consequences, which will not make you happy either. So at the end, in order to make governing Microsoft 365 scale and also governing the costs scale is by automation. You have to implement a continuous and automatic governance. That's what I'm going to show you, how this looks like. So if we take a look here, just a few examples how an automation can look like in Rancor governance. So for example, removing licenses of inactive users. Rather simple. We look for a trigger, so we have defined, for example, a check separately, which says, okay, these are, in our definition, inactive users. And once an inactive user, a user account is violating that check, then trigger an automation. Currently, the demo data, I cannot show the exact action. So here you can define also which license should be removed or which licenses should be removed. And you can add, for example, an action also to send an email or send a message to a Teams channel or trigger a webhook externally. And so you can add various actions into the automation builder that are then performed every time when an object, in this case a user, is violating that check that we have set up. We're going to overhaul the entire automation engine in the near future, which makes it even more flexible and make it look more like a workflow where you can also have if then else statements where you can change the context based on the relations and so on. We will show you that in a future webinar so that you see how you can build also very rich automations to help you address the violations of your checks in an automated manner. Another example, very simple one, when a OneDrive is exceeding, for example, a threshold, then send an email to the OneDrive owner. At the moment, it's set to a manual trigger, so you can also then go on a specific OneDrive and trigger this automation per mouse click manually if you don't want to do a full automated approach, but still want to automate the actions that are coming. But you can also set that, of course, on a check violation and check, for example, let's see if we have OneDrive near storage limit. And in this case, we're sending an email to the OneDrive owner that, okay, in this case, the text doesn't match now, of course, but you get the picture. You can just inform the user about that. And last, an example for Teams, so archiving unused Teams. So if you have inactive Teams, violating the check inactive Teams, then use the archive unarchive a team action, which is not storing anything on an archiving solution. It is setting the status of the team to archive, meaning nobody can add any data or change any data anymore. Nobody can write messages anymore to the team and so on. So with that, going back, in order to keep your costs under control, the first step for Microsoft 365 is to inventorize your tenant. It's impossible to do that in that manner with the Microsoft 365 admin centers. You just don't have the ability to connect the data of the various services together. So you have to get all the data and you have to get that continuously and link it together. Then you need to track the changes in order to see also, what kind of trends there are. This does not have to be necessarily bad that you have maybe unused licenses, but if that is getting increasing, so if you have more and more unused licenses, then maybe it's time to act for you. Then you identify and report on those trends. So you use the reporting functionality to show that to other users to make decisions on the potential cost savings that you can introduce in your service management. And then you implement those cost optimization policies at the end and automate fixing of those policy violations. As easy as that. I hope you liked what you see. We have also included or started to add a cost savings calculator. So just that you have seen it, you can go onto our website and see how much from our experience, what we see from our customers, can you save. If you're in a very small organization with 500 users, you can save already a lot of money in various ways. So it's not just licensing costs that you're saving, but you're also saving a lot of management costs, for example, in the way that you're freeing up time of your administrators that can be used for something else. You're also freeing up, of course, costs on in regards of efficiency in your organization. That depends, of course, very much on where your biggest pain points are at the moment. And the larger your organization gets, the more those cost savings can impact your business, and obviously make it much easier to decide also if you need a third-party solution to help you with that. With that, thank you very much for listening in. I hope you liked it, and I'm open now to questions and answers. So if you have anything in questions, I see already that a couple of questions are in the Q&A. So don't be confused that I'm looking down now. I'm at the moment looking at the Q&A. So yeah, so the recording question, this was all recorded, so it will be shared with you in the end. Then Dan is asking, is the program built with PowerShell? No, there's no PowerShell at all involved. So this entire application is hosted on Microsoft Azure. It's built in .NET, uses various Azure functionality, and is using Microsoft Graph to retrieve the data. So it's currently hosted in 3 data centers. So it's available in Western Europe, Amsterdam, in Iowa, I think it's Central US, and in Eastern Australia, in Sydney, I believe, Microsoft Azure data centers. And it's also possible to host this entire application on your own Azure subscription. So there's also a self-hosted option available if needed. Next question of Andy, is storage managed by the standard storage on-demand methods for Microsoft Cloud and AAD? So storage is managing storage is not part of the product. So we are not removing things for you on your tenant. We can trigger, for example, something that externally move things into your archiving solution, and then we track on the next scan how this has impacted, for example, the check violation. But the tool itself is not managing storage by itself. So whatever you define in the Microsoft Cloud and AAD still applies by itself, and the Rancor governance solution is helping you to identify and report and trigger things either through the built-in automations or triggering things externally. For example, Rancor governance can also send HTTP requests to third-party solutions that you have built yourself or that you have already available to perform actions. Dan is asking, is there a link of a comparison table of features between Office 2019 standard and Microsoft 365 Office? I believe you are asking in regards of licensing, so I don't really know. That would be something that Microsoft would need to provide. So there are comparison tables, for example, between E1, E3, E5 licenses, or F1, F3, or A1, A3, and so on. So what's included there and what's not included. But then on top of that, Microsoft provides a lot of individual add-on licenses. For example, phone can be purchased as an add-on license. So I don't know in particular the relation between Office 2019 standard and Microsoft 365. I'm sorry. Victorien is asking, can you see usage and activity on Power Platform? So you can see, let me just show that here. One moment, need to log back in. You can see in Rancor governance if flows and PowerApps are used by other by users who they are owned, and in particular with flows, you can see have they run, but there is no API available that shows you has somebody opened a Power App, for example. This is not available as an API at the moment from Microsoft to show you that. So there is, let me just have a quick look down here. So in regards of flow, you have the flow runs. So you see each of the flow runs, and these are all linked to the individual flow. So the report like that doesn't really help you so much in the inventory. But if you build a report, give me all flows that have more than 100 flow runs in the last 30 days, then you can track that in the product. For PowerApps, that information is currently not available apart from ownership and assigned users, meaning who has access. As soon as this API is available, then we would also add that, similar like we do that with the Teams usage reports and the Teams user device usage reports and the activity reports and the user activity reports. So when the reports are available through the APIs, we would add that. Let me have a look. Next one. Sandeep is asking, in SharePoint Admin Center, we can filter by connected to Teams and Microsoft 365. Is there any way to get sites created by different service like Team, Planner, Yammer, etc. in this product? It was very painful to get sites during the migration. So let me have a quick look. If we can see, so if I look at a team, I don't believe that there is an actual API information available how the team was created. So I fear that information, if we don't have it in here, so if the information is available, it would be here as a property, unless it has been recently added. But I think you cannot find out how the team was created. What you can find out, of course, the site collections that are connected to the team, or the site collection that is connected to the team, and the group that is connected to the team. And we're also going to add Planner in the future to the team, but which way the team was created is unfortunately currently not available to find out. Marcus is asking the pricing structure of Rancor governance. So pricing, Rancor governance is priced per Microsoft 365 user. So for every user that has a Microsoft 365 license and is active and is not an external user, you are licensing Rancor governance, and pricing depends hence on the size of your tenant. And yeah, you can go, if you have a very small tenant, you go to the Azure Marketplace and just subscribe there. I think the price there is starting for, like, if you have a single user and a tenant is starting with €3 per user. Of course, if you have a larger tenant, then it starts, I think, at 500 users. Then for 500 users, there's a minimum cost, which is below 10K per year. And then it, increases, of course, with the amount of users, always in buckets of users, so that you don't have constantly to upgrade licensing for Rancor governance. So it's always in like every 500 or 1,000 users, so that you have a little bit more predictability. But if you want to hear more about licensing, then I encourage you to just schedule a call with one of our sales reps, and they can walk you through and also explain you in particular how pricing would look like in your specific case. Let me see. Is there REST API available to get the data and create your own report using Power BI? At the moment, no. This is planned so that you are able to retrieve also data via an API. So the API actually already exists, but is currently not public. The idea behind of that is not only reporting in Power BI, which might not even be necessary because you can build your reports and your dashboards directly here. But if you want to have richer reports, then of course, that could be possible through that API. But the main purpose of that API is rather that you, for example, trigger an external service with an automation, maybe trigger it not only for every single automation. Let's see if we have, okay, there are not some here, not for every single violation of that check that is triggering the automation, but rather for all violations at once. And then the external system can then use the API to retrieve the data and walk also that graph basically to understand, to retrieve information that you require in your third-party application. For example, ServiceNow could be such an application, so you could retrieve data from Rancor governance. But as said, the API is currently not yet public, but will be coming in the future. Let's see. Any option for stream on SharePoint SharePoint governance? So you Microsoft Stream is now storing the recordings of Teams channels in SharePoint and the recordings of private calls in the OneDrive of the person who started the recording, and you can track these like any other file. So these are video files, and you can track these recordings with Rancor governance when you have the files add-on. So with the files add-on, we're scanning also all the files. And yeah, with that, you can perform all the actions that I've shown you and also govern these files, for example, remove them. Marcus is asking, calculator has 500 users as the smallest unit. Does the use of Rancor governance also make sense for even smaller companies? The answer is yes. But of course, the pain gets bigger the bigger your company is. So we have, I think our smallest customer has less than 10 users. And it makes sense to them, and it's also then fairly cheap. So it's not like a massive investment for you if you go through the Azure Marketplace. It makes totally sense if you want to automate these kind of actions. But many small organizations still think, okay, they can do it manually, and it's probably possible to still do a lot of things manually in a smaller organization. So you have to be the judge yourself there. But we can show you around and help you, of course, also to see the benefits for yourself. Can Power BI do similar reports on usage analytics? Frankly, I don't know. The data that we are retrieving is retrieved through the Graph API. So if, and you can retrieve the data by other means and provide it to Power BI as well. So my answer would be probably yes, but I haven't looked into that. So what about licensing? Hardy is asking, what about licensing in one tenant with multiple legal entities? A good question. We're actually going to so it's a twofold question, let's say it like that. For one, if you have multiple legal entities, you have the problem that obviously not everyone should be seeing everything. Everybody should only be confined to their legal entity, but you are in one large tenant. In general, the Microsoft APIs don't allow you to scan only portions of a tenant. So you cannot just say, give me only, you can do that in some areas, but for example, Teams, you have to get all, and then you have to sort the data afterwards and into the buckets. So in regards of costs running the product, it makes no difference if you're only interested in a small portion of the data or everything. But there are ways that we can address that. And there's the more interesting part is also we are going to add a new feature in the near future, which allows you to build virtual environments. So we are currently in a demo environment, which relates one-to-one to a tenant. But if you have in your one tenant multiple companies, maybe subsidiaries that all manage their infrastructure on themselves and want to report on themselves, then it will be possible in the future to create virtual environments underneath, which allows you to configure all that data, similar like you've seen in the check builder or in the report builder, to say, okay, this should be included. This is these users should have access to that data, and this is what they are able to do with the data. So you can build basically dashboards or reports, or give basically a subset of the inventory data to specific users to build their own checks and reports on top of that. That feature is going to be released in beta probably before the end of this year. So if you're interested in that, we can show you. Please reach out to our team, and then we can show you how it looks like and how it works. All right, with that, I think I've gone through all the questions. Thank you for staying with me a little longer. And I hope you liked what you've seen and got some ideas how you can save costs. Costs is obviously only one part that Rancor Governance can help you. There are various other use cases, like, for example, helping you with the offboarding of users, or in general with declutter or with adoption. And in general, operational governance, running your tenant and making it less tedious and annoying to get the data reported maybe to other departments and so on. So if you liked what you've seen and want to hear more and talk a bit about your specific use cases and if and how they could be solved with Rancor Governance, please schedule a walkthrough with one of our team, and yeah, we'll answer your direct questions and hopefully help you to find an approach to governing your Microsoft 365 tenant that really helps you in the future. Thank you very much. That's it. The recording will be sent to you probably by the end of the week once it's post-processed. So thank you for joining me in this webinar today. In case you are in Europe and coming to the European SharePoint conference on end of this month, please stop by our booth. I will be there as well, along with the rest of the team, so we can also show you around and answer all your questions that you have right there. Thank you. Wishing you a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.